The Zelvarian throne room was a cathedral of war, its vaulted ceiling lined with banners of conquered species, each a testament to the Empire's unchallenged dominance. Seated on a throne carved from the fused bones of fallen adversaries, Emperor Vortin loomed over the assembly. His armor, adorned with ceremonial etchings of past victories, gleamed under the firelight of braziers burning with a violet flame. He was a titan among his kind, standing nearly 9 feet tall, his 4 arms resting confidently on the throne's gilded armrests. Before him, a group of humans stood in disciplined silence, their leader stepping forward. General Elias Grant was unassuming compared to the Zelvarians, shorter, leaner, wrapped in a simple military uniform devoid of unnecessary decoration. His face was weathered by years of command, his gaze steady but unreadable. He had seen war, real war, where battles were won with tactics rather than brute strength. The room was thick with expectation, the murmurs of alien courtiers filling the air with derision. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, their worlds a fraction of the Empire's holdings. Yet they had proven resilient. Too resilient. Where other species had been crushed under Zelvarian rule, humanity had fought, adapted, and countered in ways that defied traditional warfare. Now their continued defiance had forced this meeting. The Emperor's voice was a low growl, resonant and edged with amusement. "You are the leader of these humans, General Grant?" "I speak for them in this matter," Elias replied, his tone even. Vortin chuckled. "Your people have fought well, but war is not your natural state. I see it in your kind's soft flesh, in your single pair of arms, in your cautious, deliberating minds. Zelvarians are warriors by birth. Battle courses through our blood. And so, I offer you a path of dignity." Elias remained silent, waiting. "A duel," the Emperor continued. "Your finest champion against me. A test of strength as is the way of true warriors. No machines. No hidden tricks. Just the purity of combat." Murmurs of approval rippled through the court. Zelvarian duels were legendary. They were not mere contests but brutal affairs, often ending in death or lifelong maiming. The Emperor had never lost one. Elias tilted his head slightly as if weighing the offer. "And if we refuse?" Vortin's lips curled in something that might have been a smirk. "Then we take your refusal as surrender, and you will kneel before my empire." The silence in the room stretched. Every eye was on the human general, waiting for his response. Elias finally spoke. "You misunderstand us, Emperor. We are not like the species you've fought before. We do not measure strength by the weight of a blade or the reach of an arm." He took a step forward, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "We fight wars with precision. With patience. We end battles before they begin." The Emperor's amusement flickered, replaced by curiosity. "Then show me," he said. "Choose your champion." Elias met his gaze. "Very well. I will be your opponent." Vortin barked out a laugh. You? You are no warrior." "That depends on the battlefield," Elias said. "If this is to be a test of our true strengths, then I choose the terms. We fight at a distance. A true contest of skill." The Zelvarian court erupted into laughter, some sneering openly. Combat, to them, was about presence, about the clash of weapons and the exchange of blows. Fighting from afar was cowardice. But Vortin's amusement dimmed. He saw something in the human's eyes, a certainty, a quiet confidence that did not fit a desperate species clinging to survival. It was the look of a man who had already won. The Emperor leaned forward. "Very well, human. We shall duel on your terms. But know this, I have never been bested in combat. Not once. When the battle is done, I will see the last of your defiance crushed beneath my feet." Elias nodded once. "We'll see." The chosen battlefield was a barren moon, its surface a jagged wasteland of rock and dust, stretching for miles in every direction. The duel would take place at its equator, beneath the dim glow of a dying star. Zelvarian warships hung in low orbit, their imposing forms silhouetted against the void. A grandstand had been erected on the eastern ridge, where nobles and high-ranking officials gathered to witness the spectacle. Even in the cold vacuum of space, the Emperor's arrogance was palpable. He stood at the center of the designated combat zone, clad in obsidian armor sculpted to emphasize his towering form. His 4 arms rested at his sides, each twitching in anticipation. He had expected resistance, perhaps a last-minute plea for diplomacy. Instead, the humans had agreed with unnerving ease. That alone should have concerned him, but the Emperor did not believe in doubt. A fight was a fight. There was no art to it, only dominance. The fact that the human had insisted on a ranged battle was nothing more than a stalling tactic, a coward's way to delay the inevitable. Vortin flexed his fingers, feeling the weight of the ceremonial blade strapped to his lower right arm. He had worn it not out of necessity but as a reminder, a symbol of what true warriors carried into battle. Somewhere across the wasteland the human was preparing. It did not matter. The moment he was spotted, the duel would end. A Zelvarian attendant stepped forward, voice amplified through the broadcast relay. "Combatants, stand ready." From his position on the ridge, General Elias Grant remained motionless. He was lying prone atop a flat rock formation, his rifle nestled against his shoulder, the barrel extending just past the jagged edge of his perch. The weapon was a customized bolt-action rifle, a design seemingly primitive by galactic standards. There were no energy cells, no guided targeting systems, just a precisely engineered instrument of death. Elias adjusted the scope. Wind was non-existent in the thin atmosphere, which made the shot easier, but the gravity was slightly weaker than Earth's. He accounted for that, making a minute adjustment to the rifle's elevation. Through the lens, the Emperor stood illuminated in artificial light, his stance exuding supreme confidence. Elias could end it now. A single shot. One squeeze of the trigger, and the greatest warrior of the Zelvarian Empire would crumple into the dust. But that wasn't the point of this duel. The attendant's voice cut through the silence. "Begin." Vortin did not move immediately. He had expected the human to take a firing position on the opposite ridge, where cover was plentiful but obvious. He scanned the horizon, waiting for movement, his four eyes narrowing. Seconds passed. Then a minute. His lips curled in frustration. "Where is your warrior, General?" The Emperor's voice carried across the battlefield, projected through a comm channel open to all observers. "I expected a fight, not a game of hide and seek." Elias remained still, heartbeat steady. He let the silence stretch. The longer Vortin remained uncertain, the more control he had over the battlefield. The Emperor exhaled sharply, his amusement waning. "Very well. If the human refuses to fight, then I will walk forward and claim victory." He took a step. Then another. He moved with deliberate slowness, letting the watching crowd see that he did not fear the unseen opponent. Dust crunched beneath his boots as he advanced, each step measured, unhurried. Then the first shot rang out. The crack of gunfire cut through the thin air, echoing off distant cliffs. A fraction of a second later, the Emperor's left shoulder plate exploded in a shower of shattered metal. The force of the impact made him stumble. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He had not been wounded, but that was not the point. Something, had struck him from a distance so great that he had not even seen the attack coming. Vortin righted himself, shaking off the fragments of ruined armor. He turned his head sharply, scanning the ridgeline. "Ah," he muttered. "So you do fight after all." Elias chambered another round, watching the Emperor through his scope. He could see the subtle shift in the alien's posture, the faint stiffness in his stance, the first traces of uncertainty creeping into his movements. Vortin had never been shot before. Never been struck by an enemy he could not see. The Emperor exhaled, steadying himself. "An impressive trick, human," he called out. "But it will not change the outcome." He resumed walking, each step more deliberate than the last. Elias waited. A warrior like Vortin would not retreat. He would continue advancing until he understood the threat, or until it killed him. A second shot. This one struck the Emperor's forearm, shattering one of his ceremonial bracers. The impact made him grunt, more out of frustration than pain. He was beginning to understand. This was not a duel. This was something else entirely. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the gathered nobles. The Zelvarian way had always been about direct confrontation, about facing one's enemy with pride. But what honor was there in fighting a ghost? For the first time, the Emperor felt something foreign stir in his chest. Doubt. He rolled his shoulders, flexed his hands. "Enough," he growled, speaking not to the human but to the unseen spectators aboard his fleet. "Deploy scouts. Find him." From the edges of the battlefield, Zelvarian warriors moved into action, fanning out in search of the hidden sniper. But it would not matter. Elias had already lined up his next shot. The battlefield was silent except for the crunch of Zelvarian boots against rock as warriors spread out, scanning the ridgeline with infrared optics and motion trackers. Their rifles, sleek and polished, were made for mid-range combat, powerful energy weapons designed to burn through armor, not to find an enemy who had already faded into the terrain. The humans had insisted on fighting from a distance, but this wasn't war. It was mockery. The Emperor's fury simmered beneath his rigid composure. Vortin flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders as he resisted the urge to react rashly. 2 shots had landed, one a warning, the other an insult. His armor was damaged, but he was unscathed. That would not last if he remained a stationary target. He forced himself to exhale slowly, his breath steaming in the cold air. The voice of one of his officers crackled over his comms. "We're detecting nothing, Your Excellency. No energy readings, no movement." The 3rd shot came without warning. A sharp crack split the air, and one of Vortin's upper arms jerked back, his fingers spasming involuntarily. A fine mist of dark blood sprayed across the ground. The bullet had pierced through the thinner plating near his bicep, cutting into flesh. He clenched his jaw as pain flared through his nerves. This was no longer a demonstration. The human was dismantling him piece by piece. The nobles in the stands had grown deathly quiet. This was not the duel they had expected. There was no spectacle, no clash of titanic warriors, only the cold efficiency of an execution. Vortin turned sharply, scanning the jagged horizon. He still saw nothing. "The shot, where did it come from?" he barked into his comms. "Unknown," came the reply, edged with something Vortin had never heard from his own people before. Fear. Another shot. This one didn't hit him. Instead, it struck the ground inches from his foot, kicking up a spray of dust. A message. A warning. The human had deliberately missed. Vortin stilled. A sudden, sharp clarity settled over him as he recognized the truth. He was not fighting an opponent. He was being taught a lesson. He clenched his hands into fists, his breath heavy. "Enough," he said, not to his soldiers, not to the crowd, but to the unseen enemy watching him from afar. "I understand." Silence stretched across the battlefield. The wind carried the dust away, revealing the deep impact of the last bullet in the ground before him. Then, for the first time since the duel began, a voice responded over the comms. "You don't," Elias said. The Zelvarian warriors stiffened at the sound of the human's voice. It was calm, steady, unhurried. Vortin exhaled slowly. "Then explain it to me, human." "I already have." There was the faintest pause. Then Elias added, "You're still standing because I chose to let you." Vortin's hands curled around the hilts of his weapons, his body screaming for action. He had never been powerless in battle, had never faced an enemy he could not strike back against. Yet here he was, exposed, vulnerable, playing by rules he hadn't even understood until now. The human continued, his voice edged with something unreadable. "This is what we do. This is how we fight. Your warriors believe in strength, in the weight of a blade, in the honor of the kill. But honor means nothing when the fight is over before you even see your enemy." The words were not spoken with arrogance. They were not a taunt. That made them worse. The Emperor's 4 hands clenched and unclenched. He had believed himself untouchable, the pinnacle of a warrior race. But in this moment, under the weight of a gaze he could not return, he felt something foreign creeping through his mind. Doubt. The duel was over. And he had lost. But how did a warrior surrender to a shadow? Vortin stood still, his massive frame illuminated by the pale light of the distant star. His 4 hands were empty, his ceremonial blade sheathed. A thin trickle of blood ran from the wound in his upper arm, staining the dark metal of his armor. The weight of the moment pressed against him, heavier than any battlefield he had ever known. Across the vast emptiness of the rocky terrain, the human was still out there, unseen, untouched, holding his life in the balance with nothing but patience and precision. The silence stretched, oppressive and absolute. The nobles watching from the grandstand did not speak. They were waiting for him to do something, anything. But what was left to do? He had fought in 1,000 battles, broken the backs of species that had stood against the Empire, crushed warriors twice his size with his bare hands. Every conflict had been a testament to strength, to endurance, to the primal will to dominate. And yet here he was helpless, not because he lacked the ability to fight but because fighting no longer mattered. The war had already been won and not by him. The comm channel crackled again. The human's voice returned as calm as before. "This is the part where you make a choice, Emperor." Vortin exhaled slowly, staring at the ridgeline where his warriors had searched in vain. Even now, his soldiers stood frozen, waiting for orders. They could keep looking. They could send every scout, every sensor drone, every warship in orbit to scour the battlefield. It wouldn't matter. The human would still be watching, ready to pull the trigger the moment he deemed it necessary. Vortin's gaze shifted downward to the bullet hole near his foot. The sniper could have ended him right there. Instead, he had been given a message. "You spared me," Vortin said at last. Elias' response was measured. I didn't have to. That, more than anything, made Vortin's pulse pound in his temples. He had never been granted mercy before, nor had he ever offered it. Zelvarian wars were fought until one side was utterly broken. The idea of allowing an enemy to live when victory was assured was absurd. Yet here he was, standing because a single human had chosen not to kill him. A deep, bitter shame coiled in his chest. But it was not the shame of defeat. It was the shame of realizing that his understanding of war, of power, had been incomplete all along. The truth settled over him like a mountain pressing against his shoulders. Zelvarian strength had always been measured in physical might, in battles fought blade to blade. But humans had long since evolved beyond such simplicity. They had mastered war not as an expression of dominance, but as an equation to be solved. They did not fight to prove themselves. They fought to win. And the duel had never been about proving strength. It had been about proving understanding. The nobles still watched, their expectant eyes drilling into his back. Some of them, he knew, were waiting for him to lash out, to fight until his last breath. Others had begun to realize the truth themselves. They had seen their emperor humbled, their most sacred tradition dismantled in a matter of moments. There would be whispers after this. Rumors. Some would call him a coward if he did not retaliate. Others would question whether the empire's ways had made them blind. Vortin straightened, rolling his shoulders back. His pride still burned, but he let it smolder beneath the surface, contained but not extinguished. He reached up, unfastening the remains of his shattered shoulder guard, and let the metal plating fall to the ground with a heavy clank. Then he turned his head ever so slightly, speaking into his calm. Call them back, he ordered. There was hesitation on the other end, but his command was law. A moment later, his warriors ceased their searching, lowering their weapons. Vortin turned his gaze back to the ridgeline. Come down, human. Pause. Then, after several heartbeats, a silhouette moved in the distance. Elias emerged from the rocky outcropping where he had been lying in wait, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He moved with the calm confidence of a man who had never once doubted the outcome. The distance between them was vast, but it no longer felt like it. Vortin let out a breath. I was wrong about you, he admitted. Elias stopped at the edge of the battlefield, standing at ease, his expression unreadable. No, he said. You were wrong about war. The words cut deep, not as an insult but as an undeniable truth. Vortin let the weight of them settle. Then, slowly, deliberately, he dropped to one knee. Not in submission. Not in surrender. But in acknowledgement. In the stands the nobles gasped. Shock rippled through the gathered Zelvarian elite. Elias studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. That'll do. The duel was over. And across the stars, the Zelvarian Empire would never see war the same way again.